So here is a proofreading checklist, or simply a checklist if you're writing for VCE or IB French at senior level. So I'm going to go through the points on that list. I'm not going to go into a lot of details for each. So if you feel that you need some revisions, please go back to your notes, go back to your books, check other videos. If you're not yet at senior level for French, so if you're not yet at year 11 or year 12 level, there might be things that you've not learned yet, but it's still quite useful for you to look at this. Alors, the first point we are going to look at is, for the first big section, is verbs. Why verbs? Well, simply because the verb carries a lot of meaning in a sentence. The verb tells you what the action is. The verb, because it has a subject, tells you who does this action, and then the tense will tell you when this is happening. So that's really important. The verbs être and avoir, if you are at senior level, you shouldn't make any mistakes on these two verbs, être and avoir, conjugated in any tense. I insist. Then, second point, are the verbs, or the verb in your sentence, conjugated in the correct tense? That is it the past if it should be in the past? Is it in the present, should be in the present, or the future? Does the verb agree with the subject? As we know, the endings of the verbs in French depends on the subject. So make sure you identify correctly the subject for each verb. If it is a compound tense, passé composé, plus que parfait, futur antérieur, conditionnel passé, these are compound tenses, so they've got an auxiliary verb and a past participle. Make sure the past participle is correct. That is, correct as in, is it an irregular one? And also, did you make the agreement of the past participles if they need to happen? Sometimes we've got two verbs together. It doesn't mean that it's a compound tense. It might be because there's a modal verb. So the first one is conjugated and the second one is in the infinitive form. Alors, do you have your verbs in the infinitive form when they need to be? Scrolling down. Yes. Checking the conjugations of the modal verbs devoir, vouloir, pouvoir. In itself, these verbs are irregular, but also making sure they are followed by an infinitive. And when you're using time expressions, and we've touched on that just before, if you say demain, we probably expect the future after that. If you say aujourd'hui, the present. If you say hier, yesterday, the past. So make sure that your time expressions match the tenses. Now, looking at the word order in sentences, the first thing to look at is the adjectives, the placement of the adjective in the sentence. D'accord? Some adjectives in French go before the noun. That's the case for banks. I'm sure you're aware of that. The negation. The negation, it's a bit more complex here because in French we've got two words, ne pas or ne plus or ne rien or ne jamais, depending on the type of negation you're using. It is usually placed around the conjugated verb. If it's a compound tense, it goes around the auxiliary verb. And if we use direct or indirect object pronouns, as you know, these pronouns go before the conjugated verb. So let's say we're using a compound tense, we're going to have the ne, the pronoun, the auxiliary verb, the pas, and then the past participle. So the negation is a big thing with the word order in French. Now we've just mentioned them. Direct object pronoun, indirect object pronouns. If you use them, make sure that they are in the correct position in French. Remember, in French, they go before the verb. D'accord? So that's important. So if you're forming a question, it will impact the word order if you use the inversion or if you use the est-ce que forms like est-ce que, qu'est-ce que, for instance. Make sure you've got the verbs in the correct order and that you swap around the subject and the verb. Agreements. Adjectives agree with the noun that they described in French, and they agree in gender, so that is masculine or feminine, and in number, is it singular or is it plural? So making sure that we've got the correct agreements. Pronouns. Alors, we've just mentioned the pronouns. We've got the indirect and the direct and the indirect object pronouns. We also have other pronouns like he and on. make sure that you put them where they need to be in the sentence. And also if you use more than one, so that is two, because we never use more than two anyway, that they are in the correct order. Relative pronouns. Alors here we're going into a bit more complex sentences. Qui and que. Qui and que, if you're in year 12, you shouldn't make any mistakes on qui and que. D'accord? So make sure you revise that. For year 12, we really would like you to use complex relative pronouns, things like dont, lequel, auquel, où. Alors you may have some formulaic expressions that you already know, like, la raison pour laquelle. It's great. If you can actually use them in non-formulaic expressions, it's even better. Alors, scrolling down. Now we're looking at prepositions. Alors, prepositions, they come after the verbs. There's not always a preposition after a verb, but in some instances, verb take or don't take prepositions. You need to know when there is a preposition or not. This is different to English. For instance, in English, you say to listen to, there's the preposition to after listen, whereas écouter in French is never followed by a preposition. So you need to learn that. Vocabulary. Alors, did you use specific and varied vocab? Are you avoiding repetitions? That's important. Alors, if you want to make sure that your vocab is correct, you can use a dictionary to check, for instance, the spelling, but also the gender of the words. That's also useful. Alors, a little side note here, where when you're writing on a topic, usually your topic is given to you in French. Avoid making spelling mistakes on the words that are given to you in the prompt, because that doesn't really look good. C clauses. Alors, C clauses, I always suggest using C clauses because that's a really nice way to have different tenses in a text, including things like the plus que parfait and the conditionnel passé. It's not always easy to put in a text, but with the C clause it makes it easier. And remember, the range of grammar is one of the criteria when you're marked. Text features. Alors, do you have the features that are expected for the text type? If it's a formal letter, it should have a specific form. If it's a diary entry, it should have a different form, a blog. It's not very difficult to get that right. It's an easy way not to lose points, because if you do not have the proper features for the text type, you will lose points. Alors, have you used logical connectors? Things like donc, ensuite, cependant, enfin, parce que, puisque. Do you have conjunctions to link your ideas? Alors, you probably noticed that parce que and donc are both logical connectors, and in the conjunctions list, there's a slight difference. Connectors are used between sentences. Conjunctions are used within sentences. That's the small difference. Tone and register. Alors, when you write on a topic, and I've touched on that in the mind map, the tree mind map for writing. I'll put the link up there for you if you haven't looked at that video yet. When you analyze the topic, you need to decide what tone is it going to be. Alors, if it's formal, informal, maybe personal, look at your work and find 5 words or expressions that really indicate that this is formal or informal. D'accord? Make sure it's there. Are my word choices appropriate for the content and the register? Alors here it has to do with formal and informal. It could be also because maybe you're writing for an audience in a different francophone country. That could be, I don't know, French-speaking Canadians or in Belgium. There's some slight differences. If it is applicable, and that's important, have I used idiomatic expressions? Alors, idiomatic expressions, there's 2 things, d'accord, that you need to be careful. Enfin, few things actually. The first one, there's not many idiomatic expressions used in formal text. Really, not that many. The second one, in an informal text, yes, we may use idiomatic expressions. You have to be careful because some of them are a bit more slang than others, so check that. And also, please don't overdo it. If it's an informal text and you're going to use idiomatic expressions, 2, 3 maximum. Don't overdo it, d'accord? That's 2 or 3 maximum. Alors, let's scroll down. Did I avoid direct translations or what we call the franglais? Alors, that is making mistakes between, for example, supporter instead of soutenir when you think to support, or the difference between actually et actuellement in French, little things like that, or example and example are almost the same words, but there's a slight spelling difference between French and English, so be careful with that. Sentence structure. Alors here it's really important to think about that as well. Have I avoided run-down sentences? So sentences that are way too long. Alors that's really annoying for the reader to have long sentences. Also, it's much easier, I think, especially when it's not your first language, to make mistakes in this kind of sentences. So I would suggest that you've got a good mix of simple and more complex sentences. D'accord? Make sure you've got a balance between all of them. And then finally, overall checks, like, did you actually fulfill the task? So are you actually answering the topic? So, you know, who are you as the writer? Who are you writing for? What are you writing about? And what is the purpose of your writing? All this needs to be considered. Word count, if there is a limit, make sure you are within that limit. If you don't have a limit but an indication of the word count, make sure that you're somewhere around that indicated word count. And finally, read again. You know, if you've got time, just use that time wisely. Voilà, I hope that helps.